This week on Quality Digest Live, we'll find out how quality management systems conform to the theory of evolution.
Plus, looking at ISO 9001 2015 through the prism of Deming's 14 points. That and more when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is sponsored by Hexagon Metrology. Hexagon carries the widest range of quality brands. With its extensive support network, Hexagon is also your partner. Hexagon Metrology. We are metrology.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for March 27th, 2015. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme.
Yep, you are.
Yes, I am. Using a femtosecond laser in super precise 3D printing was one of the topics covered in the article Ultra-Fast Engineering on the ASME website that we covered this week. Really a fascinating article if you're kind of a geeky sort of person, which I am. And it discussed a lot of the uses for femtosecond lasers since they were first developed in the early 1980s. But first, you know what a femtosecond is, right?
I know it's really fast.
It's really, really fast. It's about that big of a second. It's about 1/4 of a second. So for you nerdy types, you got microsecond, which is a millionth of a second, nanosecond, which is a billionth of a second, a picosecond, which is a trillionth of a second, and then femtosecond.
How many femtoseconds were there in that explanation?
Yeah, many, many, many. So a femtosecond laser is one that can pulse a laser at femtosecond speed. So very often when lasers are used, it's not a continuous on laser, they're pulsed. And it turns out there's a lot of usefulness for this. But what we were interested in is its use in additive manufacturing or 3D printing. The company Nanoscribe has developed a super precise, high resolution 3D printer that it says can print with sub-micron resolution. Now keep in mind, most of the 3D printers we've talked about on this show, they've got resolutions really in the tens of microns to the hundreds of microns range. So we're talking at something that prints at less than 1 micron. And that means really a couple of things. Number one, the ability to print very small features, and they got some great examples on the Nanoscribe site that we weren't able to show you. But it also means that you can print very smooth surfaces because the surface texture is also determined by the resolution of the printing. So when you get sub-micron printing, you pretty much can print a glass smooth surface. And it's really interesting. And all this is made possible, say the folks at Nanoscribe, due to the use of a femtosecond laser, which combines high laser power with high numerical aperture focusing optics that produce a laser spot small enough to create sub-millimeter features. So again, we've talked about this before, how 3D printing is really just advancing. Now, keep in mind, this is not for large-scale printing. The type of stuff that these guys print, I believe their print stage is really on the order of I think less than an inch. So these are really designed to print microscopic objects, but they print like 3D print microscopic gearboxes, for instance, and medical device stuff and that sort of thing. So this really is advancing the science of 3D printing to a point that's really getting fascinating now, what they're able to do with it.
And it's amazing how fast it's happened. I mean, when we first really heard about 3D printing additive manufacturing,
a couple years ago.
I mean, most of the decade is when I first really started hearing about it. But I mean, you think about it, and this was always the holy grail, was that you can begin to produce things at these sub-micron levels. Because parts need to be manufactured at that sub-micron level, and if you can't do that, well, there's kind of a limited ability to really use 3D printing additive manufacturing. But now we're seeing this change.
Well, and especially surface texture, surface finish that's a big deal. And I don't know, this is be interesting to see the science as it gets being able to use the same kind of technology on larger devices, on larger 3D prints, other than just a kind of sub-micron or sub-1 inch print. So
amazing.
All right. In another article, Darwin is watching. Jeff Dewar draws a comparison between animal evolution and quality evolution, and he introduces the idea of homologs in quality. Now, in animal evolution, animal evolutionary theory, a homolog refers to how features in one organism are homologous or similar to features in another organism due to having common ancestors. So if you look at, let's say, mammals, for instance, and we'll take a look at opposite ends of the spectrum here. You got the fingers in our hands are homologous to the wing bones in a bat's wing. And in fact, if you look at all mammalian skeletons, the structures are really strikingly similar. They all have kind of fingers or things that look like fingers, phalanges that function like fingers very often. And much of this really comes from having to survive as a mammal in a particular environment. And evolutionary theory says that mammals, for instance, adapted and their skeletons changed and squished and compressed as required in order to meet their needs in a particular environment. Now, Dewar takes this and he says you can make the same type of argument when looking at, let's say, the evolution of quality. So if you have been, as we have, in quality for the last 20 years, you can probably name about as many quality programs or ideas. I mean, you got what? TQM, Quality Circles, Six Sigma, Lean, Toyota Production System, ISO 9001,
PDCA,
and so forth. And if you look at them close enough, you see a lot of the same structure. So, plan, do, check, act, and define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, well, they're homologs. Quality circles and cross-functional teams, they're homologs. Toyota Production System and Lean are homologs, and you can go on and on. So why so much sameness in quality programs, you might ask, or maybe you wouldn't ask, but you should ask, because I think it's important, and I'll get to that in a little bit. It's due to environment. For lack of a better term. And that's one reason why quality programs are so similar. I mean, if you think about it, every business has the same needs, the same environment really, and that is to produce a product or service that people want to buy and keep on buying it. Every company wants that. And to do that, your product or service has to have a certain level of quality. And how do you do that? Well, whatever works, right? TQM, Six Sigma, Joe's Hot Quality Program, it doesn't matter. If you're going to have quality, you are going to embrace something that is going to help you do that. And what works in quality is going to look similar from program to program. And they all basically feed off of each other. They all evolve from each other. But what's interesting is that despite these similarities in all these programs, there's bickering and there's name calling and there's comments on the quality programs du jour. We hear that all the time. And we hear about, this program or that program. But the people who complain, it seems to me, about these various programs seem to be missing or ignoring one key element: their intent. What is the guy trying to accomplish with Six Sigma? What is she doing with Quality Circles? Why would that company go through the tedious job and lengthy job of applying for the Baldrige program? Because they all want to produce a quality product or service in order to adapt the changing needs of the marketplace. That's why they want to survive, they want to thrive. So we can complain, as many do, that Six Sigma is rubbish.
Yes.
You get that a lot. Or that the latest version of ISO 9001 is nothing but a self-serving standard that does nothing but line the pockets of consultants and registrars or whatever.
I heard that one too. Sure.
Heard that one too. But the point is, the people who are using these, what are they trying to accomplish when they embrace these programs? They're trying to improve, and that's a good thing. And if that program that they embrace doesn't yield results, guess what? It's going to shrivel up and die, and it's going to go away, or it's going to evolve into something better. So while it's good to be critical about the various quality programs out there, old ones, existing ones, the ones that are coming down the pike, remember that most people, just like you, see them as tools, and that's it. They're just tools. And when a tool has outlived its usefulness, it's time to get a new tool.
Yeah.
And that's basically all it boils down to.
Yeah, exactly.
It's simple,
Reading that story and hearing your overview of it, I think of that famous quote that is, if I've seen farther than others, it's because I've standing on the shoulders of my predecessors.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here, is that we're talking about the idea that you're going to build on what's existing. It's very, very rare that you get something that's built out of whole cloth,
Right.
especially in our industry. I mean, and that's okay. I mean, as we're talking about here, evolution and the process of change and improvement is linear, right? It happens in that way, and I think that people have to understand that. You've always used the term angels dancing on the head of pins kind of arguments. I mean, these arguments are just that, they're arguments. The bottom line, like you say, is we all want to improve. And whatever particular tool that they use to improve, should be respected. And it's going to work. If it works for them, it works for them. That's really kind of the end of the story.
And I mean, just real quick, I mean, look at Six Sigma. Six Sigma today, as practiced, is nowhere near, for most companies, nowhere near the Six Sigma that came out of Motorola.
Oh, no.
I mean, the way it's matter of fact, most companies don't even call it Six Sigma anymore.
Right. But the framework of it that was developed, some of the DMAIC stuff,
right, exactly,
is still embraced, and it's still embraced because it goes back to a lot of stuff before that. PDCA, really. I mean, it's like you say, there's a lineage there that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Interesting story, very interesting, thought-provoking there from our CEO Jeff Dewar.
Jeff Dewar.
Another interesting and thought-provoking article that we ran this week, and actually was the second in a two-part series, came to us from author and writer Peter Theobald, the concluding part of which ran this week, and it was titled Deming's 14 Points and Their Influence on ISO FDIS 9001 2015, which ran in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, knowing you, our reader, as we think and we hope we do, none of us were all that surprised that the combination of Deming and ISO 9001 2015 and the title would generate a lot of reads. But
it did.
Even we were surprised to see that these two articles have combined to ring up, I think it was on latest check, more than 4,000 views so far.
Just a couple of days, really.
In just a couple of days from those two articles. That's a lot of views. A lot of people, a lot of you out there read that article and had some good comments to it as well, which we'll get to in a moment. The articles present an interesting approach, and Theobald follows it all the way through, looking at each of the 14 points in Deming's profound system of profound knowledge, and he demonstrates how they connect to the language of the final draft international standard version of ISO 9001 2015. Now, in some cases, that connection was rather tenuous, with which Theobald acknowledges. The place where the influence of Deming's philosophy shows up most clearly in the draft standard comes in Annex B, which covers quality management principles. These were adapted and updated from ISO 9004-2009, which is part of the ISO 9000 family of standards. And that offers a high-level approach to quality management. It's been around for a while, that ISO 9004, as part of the ISO 9000 standard a family of standards, right, was meant to be a document that was to be used in conjunction with ISO 9001. But what they're doing here with these principles is they're actually bringing them into ISO 9001 in this version. So Annex B, which it should be noted are based on general principles and is therefore not an auditable part of the standard, offers guidance in the form of statements and rationales for everything from customer focus and leadership to the engagement of people and the process approach to improvement. Much of it underscores elements of Deming's philosophy taken straight from the 14 points, such as create constancy of purpose and drive out fear. Those words are not used in Annex B, but when you read Annex B and you see the rationales and the statements, they underlay all of that. The philosophy of Deming is certainly understood within that. Not surprisingly, we have some comments on these articles, and one of them came from Trip Babbitt. I want to share it with you now because I thought it was really interesting. And we'll throw that up on the screen there for you so you can read it as well along with me. And Trip writes in comment to Theobald's article, it would be helpful to reverse your thinking in the next article. This was on part 1. Instead of putting out an article about how Deming's philosophy fits ISO or vice versa, use some critical thinking to discuss why it doesn't fit. You may find more gaps than you realize. And Babbitt goes on in his comment to reiterate another comment to that piece from Dirk Van Putten, that Deming's wisdom about the importance of understanding the nature of variation and putting it into the proper context is critical if organizations are to improve. However, as Van Putten mentioned in his own comment, a specific reference to variation was not included in Annex B. Van Putten was part of the work group that developed these principles for the annex, so he's got a really good perspective on this. Babbitt and Van Putten's points are well taken, I think, but given that Deming's system of profound knowledge is at its core a unified philosophy of continuous improvement, and that ISO 9001 is a standard that needs to be auditable to be effective and enforceable, it's difficult to imagine how much more the one can overlay the other. I don't know if it's fair to point out all the places where ISO 9001 clauses fail to embrace Deming's wisdom. They're different documents with different purposes, albeit the same end goal, to help organizations achieve ongoing improvement. So the takeaway for me here on this piece was to succeed, organizations, I think, need to be inspired by Deming and held to account by ISO 9001. I think to me that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
You know, Deming is what we could refer to maybe as a philosopher of process, a philosopher of quality, and he's one of the greatest ones we've had in this industry. But he looks at things in a very broad way. He looks at organizations and again, he's a statistician, so he does drill down as well. But his 14 points really were very broad looks at what organizations should do philosophically to improve. ISO 9001 was not intended to do that same thing. ISO 9001 is intended to have, you don't want to use the word auditing by checklist, but it's intended to give some points that organizations can look at to improve. And it's much more specific than Deming's 14 points. I think that's important to think about maybe using the two of them in conjunction with one another.
Right.
Yeah, good stuff.
This actually kind of ties on into, to me, the evolution of quality.
Yes.
Deming and a lot of stuff has evolved from his ideas and worked. It's really, deliberately or not, worked its way into other things that are going on.
Use what works. Yeah, exactly.
You know what my favorite topic is, right? What do I like to talk about?
Everything's awesome? Legos?
No.
See, I intended to never miss that one ever again if you brought it back up, Derek.
3D printing is my favorite. And lasers. But robots as well. I'm enamored of them. I think robots are cool. But our editorial director, Taryn March, sees robots maybe slightly differently. Maybe something to keep your eye on for her. In her article, Take Me to Your Leader, Taryn takes the approach that it pays to know your coworker. And in that light, she gives us some robot vocabulary that I think we should all know. And I won't run through all of them here. You can read the article for yourself. But here are a couple of robot vocabulary items that caught my eye. These are all robotics terms, really, and they're good to know. So joint space, a potentially hazardous mindset around work tools, usually detected by testing bodily fluids.
Yeah.
Joint space.
Joint space. That's good.
Colorado. Expandability. Being able to add resources to the system, such as memory, larger hard drive, new I/O card, and so forth, not generally covered by health insurance plans. Switching from AC to DC.
Also
not covered by most HMOs. World coordinates. That's a reference coordinate system in which the manipulator arm moves in linear motions along a set of Cartesian rectangular axes in the X, Y, and Z directions.
Yeah.
First proposed in 1978 by the band Village People.
Oh, is that where that comes from?
That's where it comes from. That's right. And finally,
the dime just dropped.
Uptime. A period of time in which a robot is operating or available to operate, as opposed to downtime. Determining uptime is generally expensive and time-consuming, requiring years of transactional analysis. So uptime. And if your robots having trouble with uptime, there's always
downtime.
Cialis.
Yes.
Here that can help. And remember, if your robot's uptime is longer than 4 hours, consult your technical.
Your robotic doctor.
Your robotic tech. So there you go. Robot terms we should all become familiar with, and many more besides. Just read Taryn's article, which you can click on down below. It's a fun little read.
I detect some tongue in a cheek.
Tongue in a cheek, and plenty of sarcasm to go with it as well.
but interesting. Good read there by Taryn, so
right.
Check that one out. All right. Well, as many of us know, there are certain features common to change agents, and several of these we can run through really quickly. Persistence is one. Dedication, we know, is one. Of course, humility and other personal traits all come into play. But one thing that is often overlooked, I think, by all of us as a basic human is a solid understanding of basic human psychology and how to motivate people to overcome the natural resistance to change. Well, that's the theme of an article that we ran this week titled The Building Blocks of Organizational Psychology, written by a brand new QD contributor, Kelly Graves, who's the CEO of Internal Business Solutions. Kelly is a consultant and change agent who uses his background and training in psychology to help organizations work through the communication issues that may be preventing them from achieving their highest levels of success. So to chat further with us about these ideas, we're now very pleased to welcome Kelly Graves to the show. Kelly, Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You guys are a kick in the pants, you know that?
We try to be robots.
I was sitting over there like, oh, I can get in with these crowd all just fine.
Well, we cover it all.
All three of our viewers really like us there.
That's right. Thanks. Hi, Mom. Okay. Well, Kelly, let's start by talking about fear, which really needs something to be addressed before change can happen. So how do you overcome or eliminate fear in an organization, especially the fear of change?
You know, that's an interesting topic because you have to acknowledge the obvious. You can't eliminate fear. If I put a gun to your head, you're going to be fearful. If my boss comes in and berates me, I'm going to be fearful. And so the only way to really do that is to acknowledge it. And when a person is in a meeting and there is fear, when the leader sees that, senses it, then he or she must acknowledge it and say, I'm messing something here. You know, I can see that I'm not getting across my point to you, or you're shutting down, the group is shutting down, and right then and there, you may not know what to do, but you have to acknowledge it.
Do you think managers don't recognize fear, or they feel like there's something wrong with acknowledging it or putting that person on the spot? Or, I mean, what's actually going on there?
I think that historically, our technology has made huge advances in terms of computers and all these other things. And even though we give lip service to communication, we're really in the archaic ages of that. So I think when I was growing up, people always said, leave your feelings at the door. Come in, shut it off, and move in. But psychologically, you can't remove the relationship from the relationship. I'm going to feel certain things. And so I think that managers try to legislate fear out. Don't feel it, let's move on. Get to the task at hand. And nothing could be further from the truth, because as you're saying that, I'm shutting down. So that's why we have to take the exact opposite tack and acknowledge it. And I dealt with this just the other day. There was a very bright manager, very, very intelligent, PhD, working in a high-tech industry, and he knew the steps on how to make connection with the team. But he missed them, and he was 10 steps ahead by the time I got there. But Kelly, I touched base with them, and I asked questions, I did all these things. And I said, but you didn't pace yourself. You went through the steps, but you didn't draw out from them. So you were 10 steps ahead instead of a half a step ahead and drawing out. So that's where we have to continually touch base with the person, with the team, with the organization, and make sure that they're getting, you know, the trust, and we're actually getting it, and there's a dialogue back and forth.
What are the situations, what are some of the scenarios in which management needs to be aware of a potential breakdown in organizational communication? What do they need to be on the lookout for?
Every form of communication that you have, you need to be aware of message sent, message received. Not just the content of the message, but the underlying dynamic between person A and person B. Most all situations that I run into started out small, and they were allowed to fester. And statistically, 7 years before they call in somebody like me. They call in what I call the MBA consultants, and we need a different model. You were talking about models earlier with Jeff Dewar. And it's fascinating because that's exactly what we're doing here, is we're taking different business models and applying them. And it's not the business model that's right or wrong. It's how we draw out the people. So you can't approach it from the outside in. You have to approach it from the people and draw them out.
Well, how do you know? How do you know when team members are buying in to a change? And on the flip side of that, what are the signs and the signals that people are throwing up resistance and not buying in?
Perfect. Right now, the three of us are dialoguing. We're, there's nodding, there's eye contact. Even a person that is super intellectual, let's take two physicists, and they're very intellectual, they can still know if you're getting my point. Okay. Contrary to that, or the exact opposite of that, is where you can feel it shutting down. I'm asking for your opinion, but no one's giving it. In this example I just used, the manager said, I've asked them 10 times, 100 times. Are you getting it? No answer. And I can tell you right then, we have a trust issue. We don't have an intellectual issue. We don't have problems in the team. We have a dynamic in terms of the trust. And so that's where we have to really draw it out of the people. So getting back to your original question is we have to constantly be aware of, are we drawing out the answers to the people? Are we engaging them? Are we involving them?
Well, I mean, to me it sounds like you really, and this I guess is common sense, is no different than what we do or should be doing, I guess, outside of work when we're dealing with our spouse or our children or our friends.
Precisely.
I mean, so basically what you're saying is that we should be doing the same thing at work, in our work relationships maybe, as we do outside of work?
Very
I mean,
much
are there
so.
some certain lines you don't cross over? I mean, what's...
Human beings are human beings, and how we react, and we shut each other down or we draw each other out. And what I hear consistently, and I know where I'm hitting the target, is when I coach somebody and they come back to me a week or two later and they go, God, I'm applying this at home with my kids, with my spouse. Because human dynamic is the same, and what we're trying to do in business, because of the stress and because of the pace that we have to endure, we have to say, oh, let's forget about this touchy-feely crap. Let's get on with the task at hand. And nothing could be further from the truth. What I have to do is help people slow down. Forget the task for a minute. Let's forget the 100 things that we have to do in 8 minutes. And let's focus on the team, the group. And this isn't touchy-feely. This is drawing it out of the people. And so when I go into an organization, the genius is there. Whether we're talking about a family, a 2-person organization, or a 500-person organization, the genius is there. Leadership is not drawing the genius out of the people. And I attribute that to trust and communication. If I can build the trust and the communication, I can get the best out of this team, and then we can get to the task at hand. But if we don't have the trust, the task at hand will always falter. We see it in sports teams. We see it in any kind of dynamic. You take an all-star team, and even though all 5 players are fantastic, the NBA team that won the championship will destroy the all-star team. Is because they understand each other. They communicate without communicating, right?
Now, you talk in your article, you have a 9-step process that you developed for change and helping manage change in organizations. That you developed through some broad psychological backgrounds. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I remember that organizations are systems. Individuals are systems. We're complex. And so when I was going through my training, I started looking at how am I going to apply psychology to business in the way that I think it needs to be done. And I was introduced to Ludwig von Bertalanffy. He was a Austrian biologist, and he came up with general systems theory back in 1923. I believe it was 23, 29. And at the time, the scientific community was focused on individual understanding of everything from biology to science, and so they were looking at things individually. And what he did is he sat back and go, what are the commonalities between these? Much like Jeff's article that you spoke about earlier.
Sure.
Okay? So we know that if a plant is similar to an animal when you start looking at the biological makeup, then we can take that inference and draw it to an individual is a system. A group of 3 or 4 people is a system. An organization of 500 or 5,000 is a system. The same principles will play out, faster, slower. And that's why you have to really understand the individual to draw them out. You have to understand the culture and the dynamic of the organization to draw them out. Some are faster, some are slower. And even with professional change agents or professional CEOs that are change agents, they can hit a lot of things perfect, but their pacing can be off unless you get in and out of a lot of organizations. So I'm used to going from turbocharged tech companies to bureaucracies where you go from 120 miles an hour to 8. It's like, come on, let's go.
Unthrottle it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Kelly. Sorry.
And so in applying this theory, I thought, wait a minute. I looked at the different theories of change, and some people have 4, some people have 7, some people, there's all these different ones. And the model that I came up with was important because it had the various factors that I think were required. The most important is the first one, awareness. You have to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses. If we can hold the mirror up and you can say, I'm good in this area, but you know what? I'm pretty bad in this area. And even more so, do you know that there's a blind spot that we're all aware of, but you're really not? Okay, I'll listen to you. So that's the first one. If we can't get past awareness, we're dead in the water. We can't move on. The next most important one in the 9 are number 6. And that's where you hit the wall, okay? And this is where you've been making progress, but all of a sudden you're not making the progress, and that's where you have to struggle through. And we experience this, people experience it in dieting. They lose that first 6 or 7 pounds, then the real work starts. If we're learning any kind of new technology, it comes easy, then we hit the wall. The same thing in individual or organizational change. We can make progress, and then we get to the struggle. And in organizational change, there is, the 4 steps that most all college people are aware of, but they don't truly understand. And that's the team forms, and then it storms. It has to storm, and then it norms and performs. So storming is a very natural, normal part of any relationship, 2 or 2,000. What we have to learn is how to learn to struggle, get through that so we get to the norming. And that's what we have to do, is teach each other how to struggle, how to argue about the topic, not you and me, the topic. And then we get past that, and that we don't stab each other and we take things and it becomes political and all that. Okay, that's what destroys.
Well, Kelly, we could talk about this
we're
all day.
We're doing more too.
No, thank you.
We're going to be having Kelly back.
Yes, we'll have you back on the show. We want to set this up as a series, so we'll be talking about some of these other elements of organizational change. So, Kelly, thanks for joining us on the show today. And
thank you. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you soon.
This was fun.
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's Kelly. Kelly Gray is a new author of ours, and we always like to welcome new authors to the show and to Quality Digest Daily. Good stuff there from Kelly. Thanks, Kelly. All right. Well, Dirk's going to close the show here with a last little bit. And this one's interesting because it's about Baldrige. It kind of follows up on a story that we mentioned last week about the Baldrige program, looking for funding, and not really looking for funding, but getting maybe some assistance from the U.S. House of Representatives. So, Dirk, what's going on with that?
Yeah, right. I mean, thanks for setting that up. Last week we mentioned that Congressman Sam Graves had sent a letter to the subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriations. That's the name of the Appropriations Committee, to reinstate funding for the Baldrige program. So I asked Robert Fangmeyer, director of the Baldrige program, what the sustainability outlook is really like for the Baldrige. Has funding from various sources gone down, or was it never enough, really, from the beginning to sustain the program? And I wanted to share some of his response, kind of bridge this a little bit. So Fangmeyer says, when we lost our funding, the foundation stepped up and agreed to commit the entirety of their endowment to support the program while they initiated a fundraising effort. At that time, it was thought that the funds would last about 3 years because of our successful efforts to streamline, simplify, and lean out our processes to create additional revenue opportunities and to be more strategic in our resource utilization. We have been able to reduce our expenses by 60% while increasing operating revenues by 100%. Wow. This has extended the life of the endowment significantly. However, the program is not yet self-sustaining, says Fangmeyer. We do still rely on funds from the foundation to cover the gap between revenues and expenses. The program continues to work on decreasing costs and increasing revenues, but we are also not the only ones spending against the endowment. The foundation, the Baldrige Foundation itself, is using significant funds to build a fundraising infrastructure, which they didn't previously have. So what we face is an endowment that is decreasing more rapidly than it is being replenished. Fangmeyer continues, it is not feasible to think that we can cut our way to success. We need to be able to invest in and resource strategic growth opportunities. The funding request would allow us to accomplish all these objectives while also supporting innovative Baldrige-based initiatives across the country. My vision, Fangmeyer concludes, has always been to regain some level of federal funding to support the public benefit we provide. Can we survive without it? For a time, maybe even a long time, depending on what more we are willing to sacrifice. But really, I would much prefer to have the resources available to ensure that we can thrive. And that was all from Robert Fangmeyer, director of the Baldrige program. Now, if you're interested in supporting refunding the Baldrige program, there is a link you can follow below the player page, which will take you to a form letter which you can send to your congressman, basically asking them to support refunding the Baldrige program. So if you're interested in that, there's a link down there. Just click that, and that'll take you right directly to the form.
Yep. So take a look at that right below the player page, right down there.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. But before we go, we'd like to offer our thanks to today's sponsor, Hexagon Metrology. Hexagon Metrology is committed to helping you control your processes, enhance the quality of your products, and increase efficiencies. They empower you to stay one step ahead of a changing world with their wide range of product offerings, nearly 200 years of expertise, and an extensive support network. Hexagon Metrology, where quality comes together. For more information, just click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
Yeah, that's right. And that wraps up our show for today. So thank all of you for joining us. Thank Kelly Graves for joining us as well. And we are going to be having Kelly back on the show, I think, on
at some point. We have to schedule it, but look out for more from Kelly and Quality Digest Daily, and we'll have Kelly on the show coming up sometime soon as well.
That's right. Well, thanks for joining us, and so long. Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend. See ya. Bye.